Hello everyone and welcome. I just picked this up at auction. It's an Omega pocket watch. Condition externally looks really nice. I love the design of this as well. This is from the period just prior World War II, 1938. So kind of the end of the Art Deco period. Back looks pretty good. Maybe I'm thinking some polish here. Might just take some of this out and we can clean it up. It looks like the dial perhaps can do with a light clean as well. Those almost look like fingerprints, don't they, on the dial there? But I've been trying to use the crown here just to wind it up, and it's doing nothing. It's like it's going round and round, not getting any tension. That to me would indicate we might have a problem with the mainspring, which could explain why it's not working. I suspect the mainspring is broken. But let's just see if the setting lever will work. Just pull the crown out, and okay, we can move the hands around and set the time. So the setting side of the watch seems to be working okay. That's good. That's just the winding. Alright, well, we'll get this opened up and take a look, see what we can find inside. I can see a small opening just here. If I can get my case knife in, there we go. It's looking really clean. 15 joules. That's a very nice shape, that movement. This balance wheel looks okay visibly, but let's just see if we have any side shake or end shake issues. No, I think that's okay. So the balance staff is good, and it seems to move fairly freely. I'm just going to simulate the mainspring tension through the train of wheels. I'm going to move this center wheel here just slightly. Now look at that. Again, I think this is pointing to an issue with the mainspring. But we may have something else going on in this train of wheels here. So let's get this movement out of the case and we'll start dismantling it and see if we can find out the problem with the watch. There's a couple of case screws here. Omega, of course, is a very well-known brand in the industry. It has a history going back many years. It was 1848 when a young 23-year-old Louis Brandt started the company in a small town in Switzerland called La Chaux-de-Fonds. I'm also seeing what looks to be a crown release screw. But this crown's not coming out. Okay, well, let's get the front cover off. I need to remove these hands anyway. So we'll just set these to noon, 12 o'clock. Get that little hair out of the way. The hour hand is stuck on the... There we go. So I'm messing with this lever set release here, and it didn't seem to want to let the crown and stem out, but I think I may have loosened it now. Oh, yeah, I just felt it go. Okay. And we should be able to drop the whole movement out of the case. There we are. There's a couple of screws here just holding the dial in place. Get that cannon pinion out. It's friction fit to the center wheel. And I just want to make sure that we take the tension off of this spring here before releasing this part. Too many times I've seen these springs fly across the room, and you have a 50-50 chance of finding them sometimes, even with these larger parts. There's another one right there, do you see it? See if I can just release it. There we go. And this is the yoke. It's kind of stuck there on that post. We'll come back to it in a second. Get these intermediate wheels out. Sometimes a piece of Rodico here, this watch putty, is helpful just to remove these smaller parts. And this is the setting lever, and I need to just turn it over and undo the screw from the other side and let that drop out. Yeah. So we can turn the watch over and work on the other side here. We'll start with the balance complete. After just recently finishing an American movement, an Elgin from 1938, the same year, it's quite interesting to compare the differences between this Swiss movement and an American movement of the time. That Elgin had quite fine finishings and a lot of work on these plates, on the top plates, and also gold settings for the jewels and gold wheels. Quite showy, really. And this one, the Swiss movement, is very well made, but quite industrial in comparison to the American movement. It does look strong, and perhaps not quite as fine. Of course, it's a different grade and caliber, so I'm not doing any specific comparison between grades of watches. That was quite a fine American watch compared to this one. But nevertheless, the designs are somewhat similar, but there are differences. So just working on the train of wheels bridge here now. And we get access to these wheels. Very important to check those. We'll have a good look at those pivots a little bit later. need to get to that last center wheel here. I'm going to need to remove these wheels, the ratchet wheel. And this is the one that sits over the top of the mainspring. In fact, you can just see the mainspring barrel there underneath. And that is our chief suspect. For why the watch wouldn't wind. I'm going to just check to see how much movement we have here on that barrel. That's pretty good. You can get to work on the click spring. And this clicker here is working against the ratchet wheel and stops it going backwards. And it's also what you hear when you wind the watch. Again, we have to be a little bit careful. There's a spring underneath. Can you see it? The click spring. I know I've got a few of these sitting in my carpet somewhere. There, we've got it. You notice those 3 dashes there on the crown wheel? That's a sign, a confirmation that this is a reverse thread. And that's because when we wind the watch, we don't want that screw to start undoing itself. So these are often reverse thread, even if they're not marked this way. Is failing me here. Yes, I need to just leverage that up a little bit. I think we're dealing with some gummy oils. This hasn't been serviced in quite a while. Just need to break the seal there, and then we can lift it up. Okay, good. We can get this bridge out. Getting close to the end of dismantling the movement. And just use this leverage point here to lift this part up. And we'll take a good look at these under the microscope when it's all dismantled. It just leaves our center wheel here. And our chief suspect. And that's pretty much it. Everything's been taken off the base plate here. And we'll take a good look at this under the microscope, just do a dual inspection. There's actually a trinocular, so there's a high definition camera port at the top there, and you can follow along, see what I'm seeing. So we've got this base plate here, and I'm looking at the jewels. These jewels are like bearings, and bearings need lubrication. The pivots go through these jewel holes. The jewels are often made of sapphire or ruby, use a ruby, synthetic, and they're very, very hard, very close to diamond on the hardness scale, so they don't wear out typically, but they do or can get cracked or chipped, so we just need to inspect for that. Just looking at one of the other plates now, one of those bridge plates. Now that's interesting. Hopefully that's not damaged. That looks like it might just be dried up oils. Let's use a piece of pegwood here and see. Yeah, that's just coming away. Do you see that? And these oils over time, they collect dust and grime and eventually becoming a grinding paste, which is not what we want. Let's go and open that mainspring barrel. I was highly suspicious of this being a problem, that the mainspring may be broken. Let's see what we can find. Yes, look at that. That is absolutely the issue, and why we couldn't wind our watch. It was just, the crown was just winding around and around with no pressure, and that's why. You can see it's sheared right off. We still need to get the rest of the mainspring out of the barrel here, so we can work that out from the inside. And just be very careful, because these will fly out of the barrel if you don't control the release. And I'm just doing that from side to side here. Just get a little bit of help. It's also formed a little bit of a conical shape there, so it would have needed to be changed anyway. Well, let's get this sized up and measured. I also need to make sure that we just get the right end. I think my finger cots are done for. I'm just going to zero a gauge first of all, and then this measures in millimeters down to 1/100. I've got 1.98 there. I'm suspecting that's a 2mm width. And we'll get the thickness as well. 0.19, 0.18, I think, with the arc in the spring there. That's probably a 0.18mm. And we'll get the length. I only have an imperial inches ruler here, but we've got about 17 inches. And then of course we've got this small tail here that we need to add, probably about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. And then make sure that we get this type of end. And here it is, our replacement mainspring. I picked up an original blue style steel spring, and we just need to choose the right size here for the mainspring winder. That works. It's important to get the spring the right way around. And I'll leave the tail just outside. And for the barrel here, I just want to Apply a little bit of braking grease to the side walls. And we're ready to put the mainspring in. Oh, there's a button on the end here, I just need to line this up. There, that's great. And magically it's now inside the mainspring barrel. Got to move this arbor around slightly just to make sure that we catch the end of the tail. There's a hole in there. That's it. And one last thing, and that's just to put the cover on. Okay, we can put this aside now. That's ready to go back into the movement. Let's get this movement all cleaned up. I'm using this lovely old vintage cleaning machine here from L&R. And this first jar has all my cleaning fluid in it. And we'll run that maybe for about 10 minutes. And then we'll do a couple of rinses before it goes into the heater. And the results are amazing. This is the main plate, still with a balance on it. I kept that there just for safekeeping. And look at our jewels now, pristine. And one of the bridge plates. They're in great shape. And our wheels, especially looking at the pinions as well. Everything looks in good condition. I think perhaps we could burnish these a little bit just to clean up the pinions. But I'm happy with those. What I do want to do is just take this cap plate off. This is supporting the bottom of the staff for the balance. And it's two parts, the cap jewel and the hole jewel underneath. And we'll need to split these to get them cleaned properly. You can still see a little bit of grime there. So it's best just to break up anything that might be on the jewel. I'll just use some pegwood here. And we'll drop this into a little bit of solvent. This is one dip. It's quite strong, so it doesn't need to be in there very long. It evaporates very quickly as well, but we'll use a blower just to give it a little bit of help. And I'm going to use this train oil. It's called Mobius 9010. And it's my finest oil. And I want to just get a tiny drop, maybe half to 2/3 onto that cap jewel. And try and do that without touching the jewel. That's perfect. And it just holds the oil. on the top surface there. We'll get that screwed down and this is ready to go. Now the other side of this is this jewel in the top, which supports the top of the balance staff, and for that I'll need to remove the wheel. Now, this is an unusual contraption. Not quite sure how to undo this. Maybe this is for a screwdriver. Ah, that works. And I don't know how we get this jewel out from the center here. It doesn't look like it's going to come out from Rodico. It almost looks like it's pressed in. I see. These are pins here. There we are. It was obvious once we worked it out. You can see the dirt underneath there, even though that went through the cleaning machine. So again, we'll get this cleaned up. That's the regulator arm. I think we'll just drop everything in here. Why not? Oh, a little tricky to get out. Once this is dried, we can put this back together. I do want to clean up the staff a little bit. I'm seeing just a little bit of grime or corrosion, I'm not sure. Just dark on the end. So this is pithwood. Yeah, perhaps this needs a little bit of burnishing too. But they're in good condition. So we'll rebuild the cat. Maybe a little bit more oil on this one, not too much. And we'll get that clamping device back in. I haven't seen a design like that before. Okay, we're ready to get the hairspring back in. I've learned it's best not to completely remove that screw at the end of the stud on the hairspring. Just loosen it. Otherwise it's a devil to get that screw back. It's so small, 0.5 millimeter. Our spring is sitting between our regulator pins. And now we can get on with rebuilding the movement. We'll start by putting the setting lever back. I want to do that first because the bridge plate goes over the top of it. Now this bridge plate is going in, I think we can also start oiling as well. I want to get that taken care of before we put the crown wheel and ratchet wheel back. Just make sure that these are working correctly and engaged before we tighten everything down. Just a little grease here for the crown wheel, and I'm using a product called D5 or HP 1300 oil just for the top of that mainspring barrel. A bit too much. to remember, that's a reverse thread screw for the top. We'll put the click spring back. You can see it trying to jump away there. Yep. Okay. Just make sure that's working okay. And this ratchet wheel has a square hole. Just need to line that up correctly. And we can start work on the rest of the train of wheels. It's very important to get the pivots into the jewels, but also we have to line up the gearing, and sometimes they can be a bit troublesome. Just need some patience, and eventually there we are, the pivots in the jewel. Now for one of the trickier parts. We've got to get the pivots in the top jewels now, and that's all done together at the same time. So extra patience is needed here. We can see the pivots below, they just need a little bit of help. And once you get them lined up, eventually the plate will drop down. Sometimes you have to do it a couple of times to get it to work out, but here we are. I'm just checking the operation, make sure everything's smooth before we put these screws into the bridge plate. And even then, I'm not going to tighten this down fully until we check the operation of those wheels. So we'll do that one more time. Everything's looking good, so we can tighten this down. Now we can put that pallet fork back in. And this really controls the release of power from the mainspring. It's working against that escape wheel. Again, we've got a couple of fine jewels here at the top and the bottom of each of those pivots on the pallet fork. And we just need to make sure that that is in place before we screw these down. I've turned the movement over so we can start work on the clutch here, a little grease. And we'll add a little bit more on the side walls here. And this is where our yoke connects with the clutch. for this tricky spring. We definitely want to take care of this. They do have a habit of jumping, and that's not quite going to work. Let's see if we can do this a different way. I'll just lift the yoke out to give me a little bit more room. Yes, got it. Okay. Now, we all know that's working on an escape plan. So let's quickly get these wheels back in place. There's an intermediate wheel. And our minute wheel. Okay, as soon as we can get this screwed down, I'll feel more comfortable. Oh, that's not quite in the right place there, I think. No, that's too much haste. Let's move that slightly over. There we are. Right. I feel a sense of relief. It's not just acting as a cover plate, guarding our spring in place, but we also have this spring arm on the plate as well. And that's working against the setting lever there. So we just need to re-engage that. That's it. Now we can return our crown stem. And just check everything's working okay. Good. At this point, we can put some wind onto the watch. And just check that our pallet fork snaps backwards and forwards. Do you see that? Now it's time for the big moment. After all of that, can we get this watch to come alive again? You never know. Just carefully move the balance in place. Just trying to engage the impulse jewel in the right position. Oh, it's wanting to work. Look at that. That's definitely one of the best moments in watchmaking, to see your movement come alive again. It just remains for me to screw this down. Oh no! As soon as I screw this down, it's just stopping. That can't be right. That's not right. Something's wrong here. Let's take a close look. Do you see it? The hairspring is resting down on the arm of the balance wheel. That's not right. Okay, well maybe I can adjust this up slightly. I'll just loosen this stud and maybe we can lift this up and get the hairspring off the arm. Well, that's definitely loosened it. Let's take a look at this on the time graph, and it might give us some clues. Yeah, I'm not getting a healthy readout in that top line there, and a low amplitude. It's leading me to believe that we still have issues here with the hairspring, possibly just touching that arm on the balance wheel. I think we need to get this taken apart. Now it's laughing at me. Look at this. Okay. Let's get this balance dismantled and see if we can find out what's going wrong with it. There's no way that hairspring should be resting down on the arm of the balance wheel. We'll remove the hairspring. It does look in good shape. Ah, do you spot that? Look at that collet in the middle. It's completely canted over, maybe 20-30 degrees, and it's causing the spring to dip down on one side. So we need to adjust that. We'll do that by just moving the spring gently against the collet here. See if we can get that leveled out. Well, since I'm doing this, we might as well check the balance wheel itself and make sure that this is all in balance. I've got a tool here for us to do that. Just going to run the wheel gently, see if I can find any heavy spots. And if it keeps stopping in the same place, then we've got a heavy spot, and we can adjust that by putting in some timing washers underneath the opposite sided screw, or we can take a little bit of weight off if we need to on the underside of the screw with a cutter. Now I had the impulse jewel, which you can just see pointing away from us. It's coming over the top now. That was pointing down and then away from us. It's kind of 6 o'clock again. Let's try this one more time. Just using a hair gently to move the wheel. And now we're at 2 o'clock with the jewel. I think it's good. So I'm just going to burnish this up using a J-Cot tool, a pivot polisher, and a burnishing bar. I'm going to clean the pivots. I wasn't happy with them earlier, so we might as well get this done. And we'll get that through the cleaning cycle. And the hairspring back. We'll rebuild this balance. I can already see it sitting much straighter than before. Okay, let's try that again. Oh, just a little bit of adjustment here and it's looking much better. Okay, fingers crossed that's fixed the problem. Let's find out. Screw the balance down. Yes. Okay, time to apply some lubrication to these jewels and the pivots using that train wheel oil 9010 on these, and a slightly heavier D5 for the center wheel. This one has the seconds hand sitting on top. almost ready to put this into our timing machine. But before we do that, let's make sure that we remove any magnetism. So this is a demagnetizer. We make sure that that is not pulling the spring. And after a few tweaks and adjustments, we got this amazing performance out of the movement. Look at this. Over 300 degrees amplitude, beat error less than 1 millisecond, and we're within a few seconds per day. That's a stunning performance. So let's take a look at the dial. It was a little bit dirty and we had these fingerprints to deal with here. The unfortunate thing is the acid in our fingers can etch into the metals here and leave a permanent mark. Got a very light soapy swab. And we'll see if we can break this up a little bit first. And some of this I think isn't going to come out. We have to be gentle with it. And just accept that this is the patina on some of these old pieces, but let's soak it for a while. Just using distilled water. And we'll pop in a couple of magic tablets. Okay, denture tablets. But they do the job. And we'll let that soak for an hour and see if we can clean these last deposits off. Which reminds me of an old gin advert. I don't think some of these are dirt. I think that may have even worn through on the subdial a little bit. But the good news is we've got those fingerprints out. It's really come up clean. I'm very happy with that. I don't want to do any more. But these hands, a little bit of dirt on them, especially on that minute hand at the bottom there, towards the end. So we'll get those cleaned up. We'll finish off this side before we put our dial back. I don't usually put grease here on the cannon pinion, but this one's got quite a grip to it. I just want to make sure that we can set the watch correctly. So we'll put the hour wheel on. With everything working okay, it's time to put our dial back. Beautifully clean dial. And these hands came out nice as well. We're able to keep the blued steel finish and just get rid of the grime off of them, which is all I wanted to do. These can be re-blued, but it's a process. We just need to make sure that there's no interference between these hands and adjust the heights. There's a problem, But that's okay, so we can get on with polishing our case. A couple of marks here I wanted to try and get out. And again, I don't want to do too much to the case. Just clean it up a little bit. So I'm using a very light polish here. Let's see if we can get this stain mark out of the back here. I'm using a Flitz polish and it's taking it straight out. And I did notice this hoop was a little loose, so we'll use a hoop tensioner here and just get that back with a bit of stiffness in it. That's perfect. Now our movement can go back into the case. It's been a great pleasure to work on this old Omega 1938 pocket watch. Our theory of the mainspring being broken turned out to be correct, and that was relatively easy to source a replacement. But then the movement still didn't work smoothly, and the hairspring was interfering with the balance wheel. But we were able to get that solved and our balance rebuilt. Now it just remains for us to put the crystal back on the front and this case back in place, and we can get the watch closed up. I think if you were getting into this hobby, this certainly would be a great place to start. It's much easier for obvious reasons to work on a pocket watch. Look at this beauty. So thank you for joining me. I think with that, I'll just leave you to enjoy it. Until next time.